Hello. Hello.
Hey there.
Oh, I can hear you now. Who's that?
This is hey, Gary. This is Tim. How are you?
Fine. How are you? It's been a long time.
Uh,
At least 50 years, I think.
Probably 60 years.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah. I can't hear Tom though. What am I doing wrong?
Your lips are moving, Tom.
You can't hear him either.
No.
Yeah. Where do you live, Tim?
I live in North Carolina. And where are you?
I'm in Petaluma, California. I was just in North Carolina last week.
Where were you, my friend?
Pinehurst.
Pinehurst. Okay, that's about, we are about 6-7 hours west of Pinehurst. What were you playing, golf?
Yeah. I have friends there who live in they live in Pinehurst. They used to be in the parish here in Petaluma, California, north of San Francisco.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, now we can.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I switched to a different microphone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
And who else?
Tom, you're looking well. How are you doing? How was your week?
well, my week was good. George Ferrick is coming on the scene, and so is John Gremer.
Oh, good.
And so we will soon be 5 of us.
You're the webmaster, are you?
It looks that way. Well,
There's John. Hello.
there's George.
Good morning.
Good morning.
George, unmute yourself.
Can
Say something pithy, George.
Okay, there we go. Hey, George, good.
Hello, George.
Lombardi, I admire your retention of hair. You've got a good head of hair.
I don't know how that happened.
Hi, Gary.
George, how are you?
Good. You've last time I saw you, you were not retired.
God, when was that? That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I remember we were there with I guess we weren't there with Bob Bonneau.
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I popped into your parish there and visited you briefly.
Oh, okay.
Remember that?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Now I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I've been retired about 3 years now. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
Well, that's good. You don't have an identity crisis?
What's that? No, I don't have any. No.
No.
I took care of that a long time ago.
Father Welbers, what are you serving for breakfast there?
Nice timing, Tim.
Would you like some? I've got it's a
Yeah.
little jam and bread. Toast.
Gary, last time I saw you, it was with Dave Shaw and Joe Alzugare. I was up for that Napa Institute.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was a delightful lunch.
Yeah, and then I came over to visit you there at the Meritage the one time.
Yes.
Was that
Yes.
before that or after that? I
I
forget.
think it was after.
Yeah.
Well, God rest their souls, both of them.
Yeah. David died last October. And,
So it's a year. What date was it that he died?
I don't remember, Tom. It was he. He had come to my house. I had had dinner with him and a priest of our diocese, Dan Welton, who was the vicar general, and who is now since retired. In fact, it was just a dinner here last night. I belong to a thing called the Marin Speaker Series, and they have a series of eight speakers throughout the year, and the first three were on Zoom. And last night was Barack Obama, so it was like a conversation with Barack Obama, and so I had Dan Welton and some other priest friends over for dinner. But 2 years ago, I had dinner at my house here with David and Dan Welton. And during the dinner, and I must have been in the kitchen, David felt a gripping in his stomach, and it kind of went away. And he told me this afterwards. I didn't notice it. But after that, according to David, he began to he was not able to keep food down. And and I found out later on, it was October of 2000, I guess, 18, I think. I forget what it was now, because he retired. He had just retired. He had retired a year after I did. And by the time he contacted his doctor, I think he lost 60 pounds.
Oh,
And he went through the whole year. They had discovered a tumor at the base of his esophagus. And so he died a year later but I forget what day, but it was in October when he died. And
Well, we may be coming up on his memorial.
yeah, and I forget the date. I could find it. I kept the funeral card, but it is in October, yeah.
And
So-
George Crook should be joining us.
And I think Ned's going to be on too, isn't he?
And Ned should be coming too, yeah. That's right.
Is there some sort of time
Here's
problem
George.
you guys are having in California?
Some sort of what?
Time problem? All right, someone's coming on.
Yeah, here comes George Crook.
Isn't he the one that's supposed to
Yeah.
do the prayer? Supposed to do the prayer?
Yes.
I
yeah,
guess he is.
maybe he's looking for it right now.
He could be.
Yeah, well, George's camera is muted. So George, can you hear us?
There we are.
There you are, okay. Now you see his thumb.
Looks like sunrise, doesn't it? What's that? book?
Bienvenido.
Sunrise at Campobello? Is that vicious crook? You want to come in with the sun behind you?
That's not the sun. That's just my charisma.
Oh,
There you are.
okay. The Holy Spirit behind you.
Yeah.
There are,
Mr.
Okay.
Almy.
George, how are you?
Well, I'll be damned. I'm fine. How are you, sir?
Just fine. Just fine.
That's
Long
good.
time no see.
Huh?
It's been a long time since we've seen each other.
Yes, it has. Too long.
Too long, and here we are.
Yeah. Now, Ned is, how can I put it? Can't make it. That's how I could put it. To his sorrow.
Well, Gary, that's one reason why I've decided to record these, because somebody can't make it, but they kind of want to go back, and see what everyone's talking about, to kind of be sure we're not talking about them.
yeah.
And
And I think,
I think as you may have noticed in our exchange the last few days, the person who is really, really faithful in checking us out by the recorded video is Fred Lawrence.
Oh,
And Fred has an interesting career that maybe we could talk about one another after George leads us in prayer.
Thank you, George.
George who?
You.
Crook,
Oh,
didn't you
me?
didn't you offer to lead the prayer, or
No.
did somebody else offer for you?
Offered George up.
Okay, well, my thought was, if we're going to start with a prayer, what about, and I got to find it here, the prayer of Saint Ignatius of Loyola for generosity. Now, I guess that may betray some narcissism or something on my part, because I'm assuming that I can still toil and not to seek for rest, with a little grace, and fight and not heed the wounds and stuff. And I probably stopped doing all that 20 years ago. And maybe it's imprudent. But anyway, at least today, I just, it's a classic prayer. So, okay. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Dear Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward, except to know that I am doing your will. Amen.
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 Amen. Hear, hear. That's a good one.
Thanks, George.
Well, George,
Yes.
one thing you need to remember is the very fact that we pray these words, these prayers, means that we're not there yet.
That's
Speak
right.
for
We
yourself.
are praying for
Speak
those
for
qualities.
yourself, Welbers.
I know, I think, Tom, don't you mean we're not at the end of the trail yet? We're still trotting along?
We're still trotting along
Yeah,
and struggling with those virtues.
yeah.
Interesting, the word vocation comes back to me here, that we all answered a vocation call, but we haven't read or reached the end of our call, our vocation.
Well, one hopes.
Yeah, we
You know,
haven't reached the last
interestingly-
chapter yet.
Yeah. Interestingly, I learned in the last year or so, Ignatius didn't write that prayer. It was one of his minions, within the first 100 years or so, but he didn't write it.
Really? Wow.
And it's considered contrary. I think Father Martin said this, to his spirit. Unlike Francis of Assisi, Ignatius,
We didn't write his
when he
prayer
was-
either.
That's right. That's right. But unlike Francis of Assisi, Ignatius didn't ruin his health with penances and all of that, and was a great believer in moderation. So he would have told his boys, "Yeah, rest. When you're tired. Yeah, do heed your wounds. In this era, if you don't heed your wounds, you get sepsis and you die real fast."
Yeah, yeah.
So
And any
anyway,
good Jesuit spiritual director will tell you all of that.
yeah. But there's Gary. Where are you physically?
I am in my house in a town called Petaluma. Petaluma is about half an hour, 40 minutes north of San Francisco. It's in Sonoma County.
Uh-huh.
And this is, when I began my odyssey at the end of my seminary career, just at the very end, I had never had a doubt for 12 years. And then in the last year, I began to say, I don't know that I'm worthy of this or ready for it. And I went through a bit of an odyssey that ended with my coming to the Diocese of Santa Rosa. And I was ordained a year after the rest of the class was ordained. And I started off in a town called Healdsburg, which is about, half an hour north of where I am.
Oh, I know where it is. It's on the way to Mendocino, right?
Yeah, Healdsburg is now kind of one of these she wine country towns. When I was there, we're just a little podunk place where the biggest crop was prunes, and all these prune farmers And finally, a guy named Rich Thomas, who was teaching ag at Sonoma State, gave a talk to all these rich farmers, these prune farmers, and saying the reason you're not making any money is because you're selling a shitty product. You know, because they were advertising the fact that prunes was the funny fruit that did so much good for you. You know,
That's right.
you know, so he said you're selling. You should get turned to grapes, and they began. They were converting to grapes, and it's become Healdsburg's become a very high-end one of these places that you've got. There's a restaurant there called Single Thread that I think is one of the top 50 restaurants in California, but I mean in the United States, in the world. But I was not. It was not that way when I was there. But I started off for 5 years in Healdsburg, and I met my first pastor was a guy named Jack O'Hare, who was a real radical. You know, when I came out of 12 years of seminary under William J. Keneally and, you know, Cardinal McIntyre and that whole crew. And I remember Jack, the first night, old Manhattans, I remember. And he said, now tell me, he said, when you were in the seminary, did they say, don't get too close to people, you know, keep everybody, you know, just treat them all the same and not get too close? I said, yes. He said, that's bullshit. He said, I want you to, at the first thing he said, and I've told people, and I mean, the first time I watched him say mass, I couldn't believe, I mean, these poor old Italian farmers are looking at him like this, and he's just going every which way but under. And I've always said in 2 weeks, he undid 12 years of seminary training, for which I've been eternally grateful. And he was a great influence on my life. I mean, for the first 5 years, it was just, but then I came to Petaluma as an associate.
No, well, what did Jack O'Hare say, Gary? I missed that. What did Jack O'Hare say when you had the 2 martinis?
The Manhattans.
As opposed to not getting close.
That's what he said. He said, that's bullshit. He said,
okay.
I want you to find a cave, to go to find people where you could go and put your shoes off and just be yourself. And over the years, I mean, and like I say, at that point, he began to just kind of throw bombs that kind of, you know, all these things. I mean, like one time, he said it was a Sunday night, we had finished mass. He says, we're going to go out to dinner, and we go to Santa Rosa for dinner. It's only 10, 15 minutes away. And I said, but Jack, who's going to watch the parish? You know, I mean, I was under the, you know, he had to always be available. And he said, who will watch the parish? I said, well, I mean, he said, why nobody will? But we'll take care of the parish. He says, God will take care of the parish. He said, we're going to dinner. You know, so he just kind of began to undo a lot of the things that, you know, at least when as I experienced the seminary life, he began to break up an awful lot of the rigidity that I had experienced. And of course, those were the days when the Second Vatican Council had kind of finished, and we were beginning to try to live that out. And but he became a great, I mean, for me, kind of one of the people who helped form me very much. And those first 5 years are very important. And then I went around. I was in Petaluma. I went up to I was in Santa Rosa for a while, then to Eureka, and then ended up in Ukiah. All these places, George, you would have seen some of those places if you've gone to Mendocino. You know, Ukiah is on the way too. And then I came back to Petaluma in 1994 as pastor, and I was here. And George, that's when I would have seen you, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Vincent's, and I was pastor there.
Yeah.
August of 2017 when I retired. So, and I live 4 minutes away from the church, and it just, you know, it's nice to be free of, because the parish, St. Vincent's we had 2 schools, a high school and a grammar school, as well as a Hispanic community and an Anglo community. And it was a fascinating experience as a manager. I mean, no day was ever boring. There was always something going on.
Now, where was this, Gary?
It's in Petaluma. George,
St. Vincent's, Petaluma.
Fall in Petaluma. And it's about, as I say, Petaluma is about 35 minutes north of the Golden Gate Bridge. It's the first town in Sonoma County when you get into it. That's where our diocese.
Yeah, there are also traffic jams in Petaluma.
Yes.
It's not they used to have the arm wrestling championship of the world there,
Right.
as
Yeah.
well as the largest chicken growing
Yes.
place in the United States. And so now it's gone way past that, right? Yeah. It's really the hub. It's really the hub of that whole area before you get to Santa Rosa.
Yeah. It's a bedroom community for San Francisco. And now there are a lot of people come up for the weekend because we have nice restaurants here and art galleries and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know.
So Gary, you mentioned that toward the end of, I guess, theology, you had some doubts, and how did you decide not to stay in the LA Archdiocese, but
I wanted to stay. In fact, in the last year, I did not get ordained. Tom, I don't know if you remember this, but I mean, when the class, I got ordained, in those days, you became a subdeacon at the end of your third year of theology, which no longer, it's an order that no longer exists. And I came home, and then I realized that every summer I just come home and be at home. And I had no experience of what life was like in the parish. I wasn't any holier than I was when I started off in the first year of high school. And I just didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel ready. And I came back troubled. And I'd never experienced that before because I was always a pretty happy, I never had any kind of serious concerns. But this, I just didn't feel ready for it.
Forgive me, Gary. Happy-go-lucky and carefree was how I experienced your 2 months in Europe.
Yeah, I remember we went to Europe together. Yeah, since then. I've never been to Turkey though. I have stayed away from Muslim countries. But anyway,
not a good place
Gary,
to go
that's
now.
exactly the way I remember you through college. Is a very happy guy. Not obviously troubled. I mean, you were, God knows what was going on within, but very affable, very friendly.
Yeah.
Ready to go for a walk at any time and discuss whatever. And
yeah, do any of you remember going to your place, Gary, on the beach for a party, a kind of a class get together? Do you remember that? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't your family have
we had a beach house, and I remember we were there for the weekend.
Yeah.
And I forget who called. Someone showed up at our house. We were getting ready as a family to leave to go back to Newhall, where we lived. And I forget who it was who showed up. These are and I said, Mom, all of a sudden people started coming, and I said, I don't know what's happening here. and somebody had arranged it with my family that the guys were going to come and have dinner, and she said, the people talked to me, we're all leaving, you're staying, and someone will bring you home the next day. I just remember this, that I never drank so much in my life as I did that night. I remember being out we were out in the ocean. There was a guy in our class, he never finished. But I just remember I was bombed. And the next morning I felt so crappy. I've never felt that way in my life, and I've done my best not to. It hasn't always been successful, but I remember that night. I forget what year we were in the seminary, but it was during the summertime. But anyway, but to get back to what Tim asked, when I got back to the seminary that year, I had a spiritual director named Louis Franz. And
well, I got stories for you, but go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, I talked, I held off from becoming a deacon in November, which was when the class became deacons. But by Christmas time, I said to myself, this is crazy. I mean, if I'm not ready, I mean, not ready, but nobody else is either. We're all still the same as we were before. Then I applied to become a deacon and work in a parish. In those days, they were holding people back from orders. They were what they call clipping them.
Mhm.
And then they would send them out, and then they would bring them back and ordain them. And I realized what I needed was some experience. That's what I felt I needed. So I remember applying to become a deacon, and I went to the rector was named John Danaher, and I said, I'd like to become a deacon and work in a parish. He says, well, let's just tell the cardinal that you have a doubt about the priesthood. And I said, okay, I don't care what you tell him. You know, I just want to get ordained. And he was a canon lawyer, and I guess the word doubt for him, it had canonical implications that I was not aware of. And so he called me in, and I know the faculty, Dave Panzetti, they were all excited that I was going to get ordained to the diaconate and then join the rest of the class. And but the letter from the cardinal said that I needed to resolve my doubt as a subdeacon. And so then at that point, I didn't know what to do. And Danner said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to leave the seminary? I said, no, I'm not going to leave. I want to be a priest. So I stayed. I remember Ben Hawks came to talk to the class, and he talked to me, and I said, I'd like to get some work in a parish and then get ordained. And I went that summer after the class was ordained. I was still a subdeacon. I went to Monsignor Bill Berry in Claremont, Our Lady of the Assumption in Claremont. And I walked into that parish, and I just realized I was made for this life. This is what I'm made for. And it was really all I needed. And I thought at the end of 3 months, I called Hawks to say, you know, I've finished my time. I'm ready to go back and get ordained. And he called me in and he said, we have nothing for you. You went through 12 years. You never became. In fact, the day that I went to see him, Ned Shabira was there. Ned had become a deacon, and he and I were waiting to see Hawks. But Ned was a deacon, and he was being reassigned to another parish. He had not gotten ordained to the priesthood at that point, but he was a deacon, and so he had title to the diocese. I didn't have title to the diocese. So Hawks said, I remember I walked into him, he says, now the purpose of this interview is to determine your status in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And he said, now in May, when we talked or whatever it was, he said, you did not want to become a priest. And I said, well, I did, but not in May, he said. I said, well, no, I did want to become a priest in May. He said, but not in May. And I said, you know, Monsignor, I've always wanted to be a priest. I said, in May, I wanted to be a priest. But he kept going back and forth, and I finally said enough. And he said, our policy is that you have no vocation for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, but we'll recommend you to any other diocese you'd like to go to. And then said,
I can't believe that.
In fact, he said,
Believe it, Tim.
he said, you know, Monterey could use a good young man like you in their diocese. Let me get you in there. And he reached for the phone to call whoever the guy was in the Diocese of Monterey. So I said that, Monsignor, at this point, it's my life. I'll make my own decisions. And so eventually I had called Bill Berry, who had called, he was stunned that I was not going to get ordained. He called 3 different dioceses. I came down to see him, and they'd all said they would take me. But I eventually, David Shaw was in Santa Rosa. So was a guy named Dick Sokol, if you remember Dick Sokol.
Dear friend of mine.
Yeah, well, so Dick was there at St. Eugene's, as a matter of fact. So I went up to Santa Rosa, and they were very gracious to me. I mean, I'm sitting Dick arranges for me to see this guy named Jack Brinkle, who was the chancellor of the diocese. And I said, Dick, I don't know what to do. He says, well, yes, you go see Jack. I said, Jack, I don't quite know what I want to do yet. He says, well, go see Jack. So I went to see Jack Brinkle, sitting there in my collar. And Bishop Maher comes out and he says, "Hi, I'm Bishop Maher. Would you like to talk to me?" And I said to myself, "No, I don't want to talk to any bishop. I've already been burned." But we went in and we had a great conversation, and I thought we were just chit-chatting. He was obviously sizing me up. And I went in to see Jack Brinkle and I told him the story, and he said, he says, "I don't know why Los Angeles is doing this." He said, "Send us your transcripts. We'd love to have you here." So I went home and I sent him my transcripts, and 2 weeks later he called and he said, "We're very anxious that you will join us." And so I went up to Santa Rosa and I was ordained, that was in October of 68. I was ordained a deacon in December of 68 and a priest in March of 69. And it's been a great experience.
Sounds great.
Well,
You know,
I'm going to interrupt just for a second.
sorry, I'll shut up. I'll shut up now.
Day before yesterday, Gary, I was with Tom and Betty Cotton.
Oh,
And you might remember Betty Olguin was the secretary to Hawks. And it was there that she met Tom Cotton, and eventually they were married. But small world. Cotton, Tom and Betty have been sort of hosts to a lot of seminary gatherings over the years.
well, you know who was in the parish in Ukiah when I was pastor there? We had a little mission parish in Hoffman. Bard Zenson. Do you remember Bard Zenson?
Oh,
Very
yeah.
well.
Oh, yeah.
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 He's still very active. In fact, during the age of COVID, he called me up to ask it, or sent me an email asking if I would be willing to come to say mass in their little parish on a regular basis.
Was it a brother of his that was Dennis Zenson?
That I don't know. All I remember is Bard was in the
Yeah,
seminary.
I think Dennis was 5th year or 6th year when we started. He didn't stay, but there was a connection there.
But I told Bart, I said, I'm retired. I'm happy to help out. In fact, I'm going to be helping out in a couple of weekends in the parish, but I do not want to have any regular assignment. I'm free. I've 50 years of that.
Yeah, right.
Gary, I quite frankly avoided any kind of regular
Yeah.
commitment as a retired priest too. In fact, I decided, as I think you know, to go to Nazareth House
Right.
and to use it as a retirement base. But I'd help out on demand if someplace really needed me. And a few of the more or less inner city places, I did, go there for periodically. But generally, I was very content at Nazareth House until COVID hit, and the place just
Shut down, yeah.
shut down basically. And my story right now is that a longstanding friend of mine, her name is Karen, was had some severe health problems, and I hadn't been out of there in what 6 months or more, and I wanted to come and kind of help her getting out of the hospital, and it was I couldn't get back.
Oh, really?
I was paying rent for a room there, but in order to get back, I'd have to be tested and go into quarantine for 2 weeks. And so there was no possibility of simply coming and going. So after 2 months of paying rent up there, but living here in Redondo Beach, I thought, she's got a really nice room for me to move into with an ocean view out that way.
Wow.
So, why not save on the rent and
Aren't you in Paul Dotson's parish?
I am.
Has he sent you envelopes yet, or?
No, he hasn't sent, he and I haven't actually been in touch.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure he would send me envelopes if I surfaced to him.
But you have to,
Well,
don't you have
or
to,
somebody surfaced you, Tom, which one of us will take care of in short order?
I don't know.
Devilish, Crook, devilish.
You know, Gary, when you were in Ukiah, Al Kroll's parents were big in that parish, right?
Al Crow was his mom and dad, Joe and Thais Crow, were very active parishioners at St. Mary's, very active, lovely
Yeah.
people. And Al was married to a gal named Kathy Cunningham, and he had two sons. I think maybe that's when you were there. Maybe when I saw some of you, one of his sons died,
That's
Funeral
right.
for the son, yep.
and we had the funeral there. At St. Mary's. I remember that. And I remember, I think, George, I think you, John, were you there? I don't forget who.
I don't
I
think
was there.
You guys, yeah. So and I remember Al saying that he still needed to process all this. I thought it was kind of a funny way of saying something about the fact that his son had died. But then Al and Kathy had been divorced, and George, you know, Kathy has become a partner of your brother Dick's wife, Rosalind.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they were very active in
Holy Redeemer Parish
Redeemer Parish,
in
and
San Francisco.
in fact,
yeah.
the pastor who was there, Tony McGuire, is now becoming my spiritual director, or at least
Oh,
confessor. He's a wonderful guy, and so we all have connections.
yeah.
Yeah. But Gary, I remember the homily you preached at that kid's funeral. Knocked my socks off. You know, I still remember it. I haven't seen you since, but I remember that.
Wow.
And it was my first exposure to what I later learned was the low Christology. You talked about how, you know, Jesus must have been terrified as he approached his cross. And I remember thinking, what? You know?
Oh.
But it was a sort of a watershed moment for me, and very well preached. But anyway,
You know,
and I kept up with Kroll for years. I finally not kept up with him, kind of to my shame, I think. But I did, you know, and he had quite an odyssey, as you may or may not know. And so I knew his parents very, very well.
yeah,
And, had for years. Wonderful, wonderful people.
they're lovely people, lovely people. Yeah.
so Gary, let me ask you, because I knew his folks because they lived in Lakewood.
Yeah.
I sort of stayed close with his folks all the way through my college, and then saw them even up to Al's ordination. And so did they move up to Northern California to your parish, and how did you connect with Al's folks?
They were, when I came to Ukiah and see, I think it was 1991 something, and then wait a minute, well, I forget. It was 1991, something like that, or 80. I was there for I came to Ukiah, pardon me, in 1988, something like that. I was there for 9.5 years. I came to St. Vincent's in 1994 or so. But anyway, Joe and Thais were already there. They were already in Ukiah and very active in the parish. And I think Al lived in Ukiah after he left the priesthood. He was living in Ukiah. I think
He was.
like furniture work, or
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was doing furniture.
That's what
Carpenter,
his dad did.
yeah.
His dad was a furniture maker.
Oh, is that what Joe was?
No, he had the Crowell Mattress and Feather Company.
That's right. Yeah,
They made beds.
yeah, Betty.
Yeah.
But Joe and Thais at that time, he was retired and deeply involved in a lot of work for the poor in the home. I mean, he was there, very, very wonderful, caring people.
Yeah.
But Al had, by the time I got there, was gone. Kathy was living there. but Al had, with her 2 kids, but Kathy, Al was, I don't know where he lived at that time.
And so what happened to the son, if that's not too much of a diversion from
The
your?
one, he died, and I forget what, George, do you remember what he had?
Yeah,
He had
it was some infection akin to measles that just got him. I would probably know it if I heard the word, but it was akin to measles. Nathan was his name, right?
Right, yeah, thank you.
Wow, wow.
Very sad. He was what, 12-ish when he died, I think.
In that area, yeah.
Yeah,
Cannot imagine losing a kid.
I
Yeah.
can't either.
Yeah,
And
pretty tough.
yeah, I think Al had moved to San Francisco and was pursuing becoming a psychologist
Yeah.
by then.
Yeah,
I visited with Al at that stage in San Francisco, and in his living room, he had constructed, in memory of his son, a wooden tower that was about 10 inches square and about 5 feet high. And inside were shoes and shirts and memories of his son.
Mhm.
Mm,
Right, yeah, I agree with Tim. I wouldn't be able to,
yeah,
I've gone through, I mean, over the years, of course, had experienced, I mean, every possible way of people dying. Yet, when it's a young person, yet I just can't even envision what they must go through.
yeah.
I can't either.
George
Gary,
Ferrick, I think you only have about 15 minutes left with us today. Is that right?
Yes, I have to leave about 11. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything
So-
else on your agenda for today?
Well, what I'll do is next week I'll send you those. Remember I told you about Gary last time we had, well, Tim, when you came aboard, I kind of said, let's take 5 minutes apiece to introduce ourselves.
Yeah,
And Gary, we should probably do that again.
Yeah, because I don't know Tim, I'm fascinated that you're in North Carolina. I was just there last week.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but so my 5 minutes stretched out. I think Tom ceded me his 5 minutes. Anyway, it just went on and on. And actually Tim and Tom kind of joined in and they kind of gave their scenarios too. It kind of just spiraled around, but what stood out in my last year before I resigned was Bishop Ward. There'd been an article in the LA Times written by a woman whose husband just got a vasectomy, telling about the experience. And that led to about 3 weeks of letters to the editors, from various people that had vasectomies, et cetera, et cetera. And Bishop Ward wrote a letter that was, to me, very demeaning and haughty about the whole thing of getting a vasectomy. So a week later, I wrote a letter to the editor saying, I thought as a church person and whatever, that a family, that good parents had the right to weigh all the factors, listen to the teachings and their circumstances and decide for themselves, what their family should be. And that a person who decides to have a vasectomy could be equally responsible and authentic as somebody who might decide otherwise, so forth. Anyway, that was my moment of kind of standing out from the herd, so to speak, and just enunciating something different. So
well, that was your 95 theses nailed to the church door.
That's right. It was. Yeah, it was all wrapped up into one there. So I finally found the letter. I went to some website that you can put a word in and it tracks, looks through a newspaper to find it. So I put my name in, I put Bishop Ward's name, and so I found these letters. So I'll send them out in the following week. But that was kind of my thesis, and I resigned shortly thereafter. I don't know if I was already on my way to resigning, but I was already differentiating myself, kind of like what Jack O'Hara did with you, Gary. I had been going through that process slowly. So anyway, so I'll share those letters next week.
I'm curious because you didn't talk about it, but was this to the LA Times? You wrote this letter or something?
Right. This was in the Los Angeles Times. Yeah.
And so when that letter appears, do you get the phone call from McIntyre?
No, I didn't hear from anybody. I didn't hear from my pastor. I didn't hear from Bishop Ward or nobody. It was amazing. It must have been the perfect letter. They had nothing to say. It's just they had nothing.
Fellow priests or other friends.
No,
Shows you does not read the paper, right? Yeah.
That's it.
That may be.
Yeah, they just figured if they ignored you, George, you might go away. And
which
lo and
is
behold.
true. That's right. That's right. And it's interesting because I was all set to do a workshop at the February CCD conference on conversational prayer, which I had picked up from a woman named Rosalind Rinker, I think it was her name, but she was actually voted Christianity Today voted her the most significant Christian of the last decade or century because of introducing conversational prayer, which we take for granted now, not totally, but so I was into this. I kind of went to a workshop she gave in Glendale and started doing conversational prayer with nuns in a convent. I was even at a priest senate meeting where at the end I said, hey folks, let me share with you something I've learned. So we did conversational prayer at the priest senate. So I was set to do this workshop at the Anaheim conference, and but then I resigned, so I didn't get to do that. But it was interesting. Yeah, I kind of everything came to a head there. Anyway, that's my brief but spectacular take.
You watch PBS also then.
Yeah.
Gary, how do you think, well, let me back up. Gremer will remember this. Last time I saw Dick Sokol was over at John's house. And Dick, I remember, said something to the effect of, here I was, fat, dumb, and happy, as it were, going through the Archdiocesan seminary system, and I was well regarded by Hawks, I thought. I chose the pontifical servers, I was a master of ceremonies and all that. And all of a sudden I get called in, and I don't remember, John, was it to the Cardinal or was it to Keneally or?
Oh, I'm quite sure it was Hawks. Quite sure it was Hawks.
And what he was told was, hey, we don't have anything against you at all, but we just don't want you to be ordained a priest of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So anywhere you want to go, we'll facilitate it.
That
sounds familiar, Gary?
The same thing, Gary. Yeah. How strange was that?
I don't know.
While you're on the topic, say a prayer. The last 2 years, Dick Sokol has been in what they call onset Alzheimer's, initial onset Alzheimer's. And so he's got a wonderful wife who's looking after him, but he's giddy and happy, but forgets almost everything.
That's not a bad thing.
Does he remember who you are, John?
He does.
Oh.
When I come through the door, it's a facial recognition.
Where does he live, John? Where does he live?
It's Santa Rosa.
Does Dick live in Santa Rosa?
Yes.
Really?
I'll get the connection if you're interested.
You know, I would be, because after I was ordained, he fell in love with a woman named Kathy Burns. She was a parishioner there, and I think they got married, and then I think he went to Sacramento, but then they eventually divorced. I don't know what happened after that.
Yeah, they had several children, married happily, very happily.
Yeah, Gary, in those days, you probably were fortunate you weren't here, you know? It was not a great time to be a priest of the Archdiocese of LA, was it, George?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, it's I had nothing like your experience, Gary, with Jack O'Hara. That sounds like a really, I mean, I was doing some of the same things that Jack O'Hara was teaching you,
Yeah.
just by intuitively, getting together with certain people, and I realized that you're not supposed to show favoritism, but some young couples with working with youth ministry, and mainly it was that type of thing. But yeah, it was a bad atmosphere. It was really kind of impersonal. You would think that, many priests, many seminarians who went to Rome left.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that they would ever send anybody again. I think maybe 2 out of 8 were probably stayed. Bard Zenson was there when I was there, Bard and Boble La Vega. There was Jerry Fallon was there as a graduate student. But yeah, Larry and Fred both left. Tom Hoseman, do you remember Tom Hoseman?
Yes.
Yeah, right. He was over there and he left.
Who from the class behind us were there? Was there anybody?
John Joyce was there. Do you remember John Joyce? He was from
Yeah.
Arizona, actually.
Yeah.
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 And
I think it was right around 1970 that LA stopped sending seminarians to North American College.
yeah, well, I don't blame him, because very few people. Tony Lure was one of the few who was ordained and stayed. But by and large, Bard Zenson, Bob De La Vega, Jim Kostler left.
Yeah.
He became a very successful president at Pasadena City College. President of, and yeah, so the record was not good. Frank Lyons left, and
Did Frank go to the North American College?
yeah, yeah. And then Larry Shalburn left. He spent some time as a secretary, I think, to Cardinal McIntyre, driving the car around or whatever. Yeah.
When I,
Wow.
in 2000,
Gary, you mentioned Father Franz.
depends, yeah.
Somehow, Father Franz and I had become good friends my 4th year in the seminary, which was largely taken up with me quitting.
Fourth year what, George?
College.
College, I'm sorry.
College, okay.
Yeah, 1963, 64. And he performed my marriage to Rachel, which ended later. But so Ned and I renewed our acquaintance with him in the year 2016. I called him up and said, hey, we want to come and see you. And by now he was retired in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So we flew down there and spent just the most wonderful 3 days with him. He died the following year. He had cancer, melanoma, I think. And he had bought a couple years with this treatment where they use your immune system, to fight cancer, to spectacular success. And then he got the flu in a bad flu year, 2017, and that was all she wrote. But the story I'm going to tell you is we had a lot of frank talks about the seminary in our era, and Monsignor Hawks and Cardinal McIntyre and Keneally and all this. And Father Franz told us that the Vincentians and the Chancery the last few years were kind of at war. And McIntyre, here we're all, it was this plethora of liberal priests, right? Dubé, Sokol, whomever. And the cardinal blamed the Vincentians. And he was pressuring them to start I think it was a Southern California province of the Vincentian order. Might have been California, but so that they could control who got ordained to teach in his seminary, and they would be certain to be reliable men and uncontaminated by the fevers of Chicago and
the Second Vatican Council.
Yeah, and but the symbol of all that in the American church in those days was Chicago, right? That was the hotbed of renewal, et cetera, et cetera.
It was like the premier diocese.
Yeah, and I don't remember Bernardin was there yet, but he was like, no, we'll get local people and we'll expose them to local things only. And then we'll ordain them priests and send them to teach in St. John's. And Father Franz, who had the classes behind us, despised Father Franz because they saw him as this down the line, conservative loyalist to McIntyre and Hawks. And he wasn't at all. He was, he had the great Vincentian virtues of obedience and prudence, but he despised Hawks and he despised the cardinal. He thought
George, you might take a minute, please, and tell our friends where Franz went in prison and Native American ministry.
I didn't want to monopolize, but I will. But anyway, so when he was rector of the whole shooting match, after you guys were ordained, he had a 6-year term. And after 4 years, he went and saw his provincial and said, I'm out of here. I can't stand these guys. He thought Cardinal McIntyre was an outrageous racist. And he remembered McIntyre saying after the riots I don't understand it. What is it that the darkies want? And said it with sincerity. That was the real guy. That was McIntyre. Remember the Rumsfeld Act about fair housing? I think white parents have the right to protect their daughters, and they should be concerned. And that was our shepherd. And Father Franz, who was from New Orleans, as you recall, he was just appalled. He just couldn't stand it. So,
George, here's a question for you about that in relation to Gary and Dick Sokol. Do you think Franz was also pissed off that here they are running the seminary and they think Gary's a good candidate and Dick Sokol is too, and then they're vetoed by the distant Chancery office? Do you think that pissed them off too, that here are what they consider good quality candidates going through the process, and then they come in at the end and sweep them out?
I don't know the answer, but
Okay.
I can tell you something by analogy. My wife's brother, Gary, is the just retired Bishop of San Bernardino, Riverside, Jerry Barnes.
Oh.
And before he had that position, he was rector of the seminary in San Antonio. And even then, he had struggles. He would think somebody was a great candidate, and that was a kind of a regional seminary. And the bishop for the kid would disagree. And then when he became a bishop, he was not happy with some of the guys that St. John's, because he originally sent his guys to St. John's, were willing to push through.
Ah, I see.
So Yeah,
So
by
yours-
analogy,
Yeah.
it has to be in the culture of seminaries and bishops,
Yeah.
that has to be fairly frequent, I would think.
But wasn't that a time when so many of the guys going through and coming out of St. John's were ultra conservative and, liked cassocks and lace and French cuffs and all that kind of stuff?
No, I think that's, Gary, you'll know, didn't that stop about 66 or so?
I'll tell you what, I think that's what's happening now. That's what's happening now.
Yeah.
I know
And it
that.
was in the 90s.
All across the board. I mean, to me,
Hey, Gary,
I was happily.
Gary, can you get closer to your microphone? It's,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
A number of years ago, I got a call. I had one of our deacons, John Norris, had a friend who was a writer for the National Catholic Reporter. And this guy called me and said, I'd like to come and talk to you. I had gotten into clergy education and and it was a great experience. And I met a lot of priests around the country, but I was busy really working in the parish, and he wanted to come and talk to me about the difference between Vatican II priests and John Paul II priests.
Mhm.
And I wasn't, at the time, I was not aware of a lot of stuff happening, but since then, what I've noticed is and now we have a bishop who's a very, his name is Basha, and he's a very conservative, now bishop. But all these young seminarians today coming out of whatever seminary, I don't know what St. John's is producing, but Tom, they're like the guys who like cassocks and lace surplices. They love the Latin Mass. They think Vatican II priests are the ones who ruined the church, and it's like a time warp. They had this love affair with the pre-Vatican II church that they never experienced.
Mhm.
It's kind of weird. I stopped. There's a young kid. He was our associate here at St. Vincent's. He just moved up to take over the parish in Fort Bragg, but he would say the first Eucharistic prayer every single Sunday. That's the only. I finally stopped going to his masses because I said I wanted to concelebrate, but there's really
Excuse me a moment.
Yeah, but that's what's happening now.
Gary, is the first Eucharistic prayer the
old-
one we would remember from
The Roman canon, right? Yeah.
Clement, Cornelius, Cyprian?
Yes, all those guys, and to me, it's like a symbol of where you stand in the church today, whether you're a Vatican II priest or whatever you call them now. I don't know what you call these guys that are they don't like a lot of these bishops that don't like Pope Francis because they think he's a heretic or too liberal or whatever else, and he's not that, but but the first Eucharistic prayer is kind of there. Yeah, they seem to love it, and there's a lot more Eucharistic prayers that you could use, but
And and they're written very thoughtfully, many of them.
maybe we're all shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. I don't know, but that's
Your perspective from North Carolina. We've had a number of newbies come to-
Guys, I have to bow out, so
Bye,
George,
George.
I'll see you. I'll listen to the tape of this. Good to see you, Gary.
Good to see you, George.
You
Yeah,
look great.
George,
Thank you.
You're doing well in retirement.
It is the greatest invention since the beginning of human life.
You look wise and joyful.
Well, George, when the time comes for you to think about retiring, run, don't walk. It's great.
Great. Okay, Gary. Great to see you.
Thank you. See you too.
So what we're seeing in North Carolina is what Gary is talking about. Young priests are coming out and
Yep.
are demanding to be able to say the Latin Mass.
Yes, yeah,
They believe in a much more formal liturgy than I have seen over the last 20, 25 years. They are much more, how about what, they are much more clerical.
yes, yes,
If clericalism was what you guys are talking
yes.
about
That's
when
exactly.
Ferrick went to Pomona, these young guys really have a sense, and I'm thinking of 3 young pastoral associates that have only lasted 1 year in our parish, and they've asked to be transferred to different parishes. But anyways, they all have come from reasonably upper middle class families. Okay. I think they have a sense of entitlement, which is sad to me. And I
That's
think,
clericalism. That's,
yeah, they have a sense of entitlement. We always, I think every priest in the last 30 years, it would be Father Tom or Father George or Father Gary. These guys, no. It's Father Ferrick or it's Father Crook. Don't ever say Father Gary or it's a
Or
formality.
Monsignor.
Yeah, it's a formality that they demand, and they demand it. And the other thing that we're seeing is that they are pushing the envelope in terms of their resistance to the bishop. And we have a bishop who is he's invisible. And for an example, there's a parish just down the mountain from where I live, and it's a young priest, and he had been delivering sermons prior to the election that he would not give communion to anybody in the parish that voted for Biden. And he said,
how did they get away with that? I don't understand.
well, and he wrote something for insertion into the bulletin that sadly turns out to be written by a bunch of right-wing priests about, that no Catholic could vote for a Democrat because of the abortion thing, which sadly my pastor printed, and it was bullshit. But these young guys that I have seen in the last 4 or 5 years are very, very conservative politically. You don't have to guess how they vote or whether it's, but they will preach against Francis from the pulpit.
Yes.
I mean, from the pulpit, they will say, that you don't have to obey Francis because what he's talking about is heretical. It's just mind-boggling to me. So when you're talking about the guy asking you what's coming out of St. John's, it would be interesting to me to see. It's kind of like is it the deck chairs on the Titanic? I don't know.
I all I know is I don't know. Tom would know. You know.
Guys must have young.
To me, they're all a cookie cutter. I have a priest friend in Lake Charles, Louisiana. He says the seminarians are the same. Or the younger priests are the same as they are in our diocese or in North Carolina. I don't know what they're like in Los Angeles.
My own experience is that they are, they're very mixed. I would say more or less 50-50. Those ordained in the last 15 or 20 years, about half of them would be solidly John Paul II priests who like, lace and incense and very right-wing politics, and the other half are, hey, real pastoral guys.
Okay.
But
well, John Paul, I mean, to me, John Paul is such a paradoxical figure,
yeah.
I mean, he's a favorite saint of mine, but I didn't much agree with him. I admired him. And I've read, what's his name's biography of him? What's his name?
Weigel?
Yeah,
Michael.
you know, which I thought was very moving. And I mean, he was a tremendous figure, and he wasn't that reactionary, you know, but he became a symbol of it.
Well, for example, the anti-abortion people, they read only one part of Evangelium Vitae, and they forget all of the other stuff on capital punishment. The primary metaphor that he uses for the sacredness of life was the fact that Cain was not killed in retaliation by God. That Cain's life was protected. And
I remember that document very well. I was on the Justice of Peace Commission when he wrote it. And I had this rule of thumb. I didn't want anybody on our commission who was from the Right to Life League. You know, and as I told Archbishop Gomez when he consolidated the pro-life office with the Justice and Peace office, I said, Archbishop, please don't do that. You can't work with these people. I mean, to them, abortion is the preeminent issue, and that means there's no other issue. We'll worry about napalm on innocent villagers once we've solved abortion, because that comes first. And we'll worry about starvation. We'll worry about everything else, but this comes first.
Yeah.
Part of this conversation makes me wonder if there may be another topic, and that is the difference between diocesan seminaries and the seminaries for the order priests.
Now, that's a great observation. Because the order priests aren't anywhere near like this, are they? Depends on the order, I imagine. But
I think there are some of these order priests are the same. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are, but we have, I think there's far more in the diocesan priesthood than in the religious orders.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I mean, I can guarantee you the Jesuits aren't turning out people like this.
No.
But George, are they turning out anybody?
Yes, they are. But
Okay.
I don't know, it's not like we got a Jesuit Pope and here came thousands of applicants. That did not happen.
Yeah.
I want, Gary, you probably get asked about this all the time. Pat Zeman.
Please talk about that.
Oh.
Well, let me tell you, to me, when we were in the seminary, I thought he was a model, just a complete model seminarian. He was kind, he was affable, he would walk the last mile with somebody. If you were struggling getting your term paper typed, Pat would say, I'll do it, and never ask anything. And he was everybody's model seminarian. And then he's the auxiliary bishop of LA. And actually, Ned had some inklings that there were some problems here, but he didn't spread it around. And so then he goes up to Santa Rosa. And I was at his installation mass because I was getting an annulment for my first marriage. And Pat had volunteered to be my advocate, So I was seeing him reasonably often. And, he's Pat Zeman, wow. And I remember when he got installed up there at his homily, and it must have raised a lot of eyebrows locally. He said something to the effect of, well, I never thought I'd wind up in Santa Rosa. Too far, too small. But that, you remember that?
I don't remember those words, but
But anyway, so then he's the ordinary, and so we all assume everything's hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden, I hear this recording on the radio of him and his boy toy, whose name eludes me, but and Pat is saying to him, "Oh, I gave you STD. Oh, well, that was wrong of me. I shouldn't have forced you." And this was on the radio in San Francisco because the guy was recording stuff by the time he decided to shake Pat down. And what happened to him? Did he cease to be a good guy? Was he a good guy with some human weaknesses that kind of he gave into from time to time and increasingly? Was he another McCarrick who just used his office to get laid? I mean, what do you think?
Pat, when Pat,
It was a nun in your parish that blew the whistle on him financially, right?
Jane Kelly, I remember. Pat, when Pat came, we had gone through years with a guy named Mark Hurley, who was an egotistical kind of guy who didn't have much feeling for people. And then when he left, we had John Steinbach, and John was, just a breath of fresh air compared to Mark Hurley. And then Pat came along, and Pat in every way was the kind of bishop you'd want. I mean, he was very caring and all that sort of thing. But in some ways, it's like Pat's the one who's doing, youth retreats, and he's doing marriage encounters, and he's doing this and he's doing that. It's like, who's running the ship? Pat was doing all this work, and there came a point, I know, and he was always very good to me. There came a point when I realized you could never call the Chancery office and get Pat. Pat was always on the road. He was always called you back. And I remember there came a point when I think he was just burning the candle at both ends, is what was happening. The priest that you're mentioning is a guy named Jorge Hume. Jorge came to my parish, to St. Mary's in Ukiah. He had been a seminarian and had studied somewhere in Mexico. He was from Costa Rica. And then he came to St. Mary's. Pat offered, I needed somebody, and he offered this guy to me, and I said, okay. But he was a seminarian at the time. I don't know, I forget what he had been, gone to the seminary, got all of his degrees in Mexico somewhere. And he turned out to be a real, one of these conservative kinds of priests. He was beginning to treat, he would have like, when for first communion, he'd grill these little kids and have them sit in and he'd ask them questions, and if they get an answer, he'd threaten them with not being able to receive their first communion. So at one point I drove the guy to tears, and I said I was upset with him about something, and I had to go do a funeral. And I came back from the funeral, and he's in his room crying, and he said, I can't please you. I can't please you. And I said, look at Jorge, you are trying to bring back a church that I left a long time ago, and we're not going to go back to it. So Pat was going to ordain him, and I remember him and Jane Kelly. This is the nun you're talking about, who she became kind of the like the Moliere Fortis for a while in Center Road. It was exposing all these things. She was a great associate for me. And then she kind of read her own headlines and kind of kept, she loved being on the front page of the news. But I made her his kind of the guide. I mean, she was kind of in charge of him, I forget the word, it's not coming to me now. That's when you get to be 79, that's what happens. You can't remember the word. She was his, the person who was in charge of him. And when Pat wanted to ordain him, we both said, just a minute, don't you want to talk to us? I mean, we have our own concerns about it, but they were mostly ecclesiological, you know, that whole business of how you treat people and that sort of stuff. But Pat went ahead and ordained him anyway. And then I eventually left and came to St. Vincent's. And I remember I had been, somebody from a prior parish up in Eureka had called me about a teacher up there who was let go. And they thought, you know, this is unjust. She's been teaching there for all these years. And I said, well, I better call Pat because I want to talk to him about this teacher. I'm sitting in my office, and this is in July of whatever it was, 1999. And I got a call from Pat, and I said, oh, great, I'll talk to him about this teacher, Laura Lee. And I said, hi, Pat, how are you? And he said, well, I'm not doing very well, Gary. He said, as you know, I've been under an awful lot of stress the last year, which I did not know. I'll just know that he was running around and running around and running around. And he said, and tomorrow, he said, the paper, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, is going to come out with a story about Jorge Hume suing me for sexual battery. Well, and I'm like this, you know, I mean, you could have knocked me off my chair with a feather. I was absolutely stunned. And he said, and whether it's true or not, I can't bring the diocese into it, so I'm going to resign the diocese. Well, I don't know what else to say, but that apparently, you know, he was, maybe, I don't know what it was, but he was burnt out, basically. And that's how he fell prey to whatever the sexual, you know, thing. But I know that Jorge had this idea that, you know, the bishop is way up there and I'm here, and Pat I don't know that Pat cynically used his power. I think just the fact that he was the bishop and Jorge was the priest, that Jorge submitted to something. I don't know, but it was a scandal, and it was very difficult. And in fact, that weekend, it came out in the papers, and then the next day, the Friday, the headline was that the bishop said, Zeman said it was a consensual relationship. Well, wow. And here we have to preach that weekend.
And this is your defense?
The person that saved me was Dave Shaw. I called David and I said, David, I don't know what to do. And he said, you know, Gary, he said, I've gone through every emotion I can possibly think of. And the only thing I'm going to tell my people is how I'm dealing with it. And that is what I did. And it's the very best thing I could have done.
Pastoral, totally pastoral.
Well, I said, I said that I'm with you. I said, here's what we have to have faith. In that weekend, that the epistle, the second reading was Paul saying, you know, God, that I forget the exact quote, but we've all heard it, you know, that for those who love God, all things work together for good. I said, and somehow we have to believe that God will bring us all through this. And so for the next number of weeks, I would just tell people, here's how I'm dealing with it. And finally, they started saying, Father, how are you doing? And I finally said, wait a minute, I'm doing fine. This is for you, you know. So Pat, so that was a scandal. And then after Pat left, Leveda came in to run our diocese. He was the Archbishop of San Francisco at the time, but he also administered Santa Rosa. And his finance guy discovered that we were on the verge of bankruptcy. Pat was running the diocese without, and we had a guy named Tom Keyes who was our vicar general, but Tom functioned without budget. They functioned without a budget. And I mean, Pat was just, you know, he wasn't spending money on himself. He was doing all kinds of good things. He was just doing it without a budget. So he demolished us, you know, from the point of of his own personal life, and then financially as well. And the people could forgive the sexual part. It's the financial part that they couldn't forgive. And they
Such a lasting damage.
for that, huh? Pardon me?
Such a lasting damage.
The financial one was the thing that people most, yeah, even now, old timers still, if you want to call them old timers, they still have a concern about the diocese and the finances, even though the bishop we have now is very responsible financially. You know, so.
George Crook, with regard to the Zeman and the Scott families, were they not high profile, very successful, but private life somewhat sordid?
I don't know the answer to that. But Tim, that's something you and I discussed. I mean, Pat's, I think maternal grandfather was Joseph Scott, the famous Catholic attorney in LA, who had given the nominating speech for Herbert Hoover at the 1928 Republican Convention. And his dad was Judge Zeman, as you know, and you know, Louis Del Castillo had a story about Judge Zeman. Once he was staying overnight at Pat's house and woke up, and Judge Zeman was in bed with him and had a leg hooked over his. And I think Louis' story to Ned anyway was he punched him and fled the house, you know. So, I mean, maybe it was just a snake pit of a family. Maybe Pat was molested by his old man. I mean, who knows these things? But I just, wow. I mean, and I had such regard for Pat, you know? And then this, I mean, this wasn't just some low-grade scandal, right, Gary?
No, it was, I mean, can you imagine, you say to yourself, I mean, I had this young priest, he's what, I don't know, I couldn't even begin to comprehend this. I mean,
Yeah.
all I remember, we had to preach about it. It just, oh, it was amazing. I mean, stuff we've gone through, just amazing.
You know,
At least signed up for it.
yeah, well, and now we have this little unpleasantness in France, you know?
Yeah.
What, 300,000 kids supposedly
Yeah.
molested over, what, 70 years?
But
That's
see,
like 100 kids a priest.
and George, this is stuff that's happened besides all the sexual abuse stuff that every priest in this country has had to deal with, you know, over the years.
Mhm.
Yeah. And yet I don't know. In this country, we're getting a bum rap. I mean, every study that comes out, like the Pennsylvania Attorney General a few years ago, that's all old news.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, the since 1980 or 82, I guess it is, we've done a good job.
George, isn't that the same thing with this report in France that is really past stuff?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think it might be.
I hope. I mean,
I think it is, yeah.
it's a long way since the bells of St. Mary's, you know.
There's something that's happening though, and that is, I think that so for example, I know two priests in the diocese here who so one guy was the pastor of the largest church in the diocese. And when he was 19, when he was in college, he dated a girl, okay? And he's been passed, okay, so that was almost 30 years ago. And here's where I think maybe the church has gone overboard. Well, 3 years ago, and so he's been pastor of this parish and has done a remarkable job. And it's just, parish has got 10,000 families. It's got 10 priests assigned to it, just a great parish.
Wow.
So, but this girl writes a letter to the chancellor saying, well, when we were dating, he he got really fresh with me. And he didn't screw or anything like that, but he really did something that was very, very offensive to me. And I think that you should know about that. So the bishop suspended him as a result of that, suspended him because she said, unless you do something, I'm going to go public with what he did when we were freshmen in college. And they were at UNC Chapel Hill at the time. And so he was removed. And so there was a letter to the parish that was read, is that Father Matt has been removed, pending an allegation that we will look into with no particulars. Well, a friend of mine is a very, very good friend of his, a guy who had been at St. Matthew's Parish, is now a member of my parish and good friend of his. And he has been actually told, you will never return to the ministry again. And he said, look, he said, I admit I did it. He said, I was dating, and he said, I fondled her boobs. I remember it. And he said, it was a stupid thing that I did. But
rather natural, rather human.
And probably 99% of college guys made an effort to do that. And so I don't know. I don't know how to I don't know how to understand that. I don't know why. And I use the word church. I don't know why the bishop couldn't have said, or Father Matt couldn't have said, look, when I was in college, I got fresh with this girl. I'm not going to name her. It was the wrong thing to do, and make kind of a moral lesson out of it for all of the 19-year-old college guys that were there. But instead, his career is over. And so I agree with you, George, is that I think the church really has done a phenomenal job in its education and what it does for laity. I mean, the stuff, we're Eucharistic ministers, the stuff we have to do every month, we have to go through a program, an online program called Virtus.
Yeah, no, I've gone through that. Same thing here.
But I think that bishops are running scared shitless.
Yes.
Yeah. And I feel sorry for priests who 30 or 40 years ago, when they were college kids, before they were priests, I mean, it's just sad.
Well, it's absurd, Tim. He should get a canon lawyer. The guidelines don't permit the bishop to do that in these circumstances. I don't think, do they, Tom?
I really don't know. What's going through my mind is they're running scared because that zero tolerance policy was first adopted back in 2002 or 2003. And, since then, everybody's being a watchdog.
How true.
On the bishops.
Yeah.
And yeah, they are running scared.
But there are some procedural due process to which
There should be. There should be.
But okay, so yeah, so he gets a canon lawyer.
Yeah, and I think there is an organization of canon lawyers, and I think they're a rather conservative crowd. I forget pro bono sacerdozi or something like that seem to be available for helping priests who are subject to canonical penalties because of these allegations. Now, how much clout they have, I have no idea.
I think about zero.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, he's being too passive, I think.
Well, I don't know. You know,
Well, I thought, is he an order priest or
he does.
I mean, that would certainly take the wind out of your sails if your bishop told you that.
Yeah, you better believe it. So anyways, that's, yeah, so.
Yeah.
there's-
Opus Bono Sacerdotii.
Thank you.
And they're
That's
based
the
in,
canon lawyers.
yeah. And they're a nonprofit based in Dryden, Mississippi, I believe.
Dryden, Germany.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that's Dresden.
MI is Mississippi, isn't it?
Yes.
From Michigan.
Or Michigan.
But
That's
Gary, wouldn't it a priest who's accused for copying a seal on a date 20 years, 30 years ago have some sort of due process rights within the juridical system we have? Not, I mean, that's just an absurd punishment, isn't it? Huh?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, the zero tolerance policy to me is an overreaction to the situation. It's an overreaction. I mean, guys can make mistakes. You make a mistake. I mean, we're not angels. You know, we're enfleshed people, and at least in my feeling is that the energy that can get you in trouble is the same energy that helps make you a wonderful and caring person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The problem is, you know, if you use your power, I mean, you're talking about predators, and if you like, even Pat Zeman he wasn't a predator. I just think he fell into something, you know, but that's my belief. But there are certain, I don't understand these abusers. I mean, I know that there's all this about grooming and all that kind of stuff. But I think you have to make a distinction between someone like that and someone who just kind of falls and makes a mistake, you know. But the way the zero tolerance policy is one strike and you're out.
Let me ask you guys something. And I asked Johnny, Gremer, I asked you this a couple of years ago. In all the time that we were at Queen of Angels, and I was a really naive little kid. Do you think that any of those priests that were our teachers at Queen of Angels, was at the time that we were there, do you think there was anything untoward that happened while we were there?
And my answer is, I suspect yes.
Do
I
you?
know, yes.
However, I think those offenders were wise or scrupulous enough to weed out those of us who clearly would reject them. Now, too bad Shavira's not here because he got tested, did he not?
He's got a good story. It was with Father Danaher.
Who was
Not
Dan?
the one.
Who was
Ed,
Dan?
Ed Danaher, not John.
Ed Danaher.
Yeah, Ed Danaher. The one with the dark glasses and the indulgences on the chapel wall. But, you know, Danaher made it
What did he
past
teach?
that.
What did Danaher teach?
Pardon me? What?
What did Danaher teach in high school?
I don't know. We never had him.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So,
He was a spiritual director. Our junior year and maybe junior year.
okay.
Wasn't there an incident where he got drunk and Bill Fraser was in the dormitory or something or other? And
I don't know.
I didn't
I don't
remember
know.
that severe, but I remember Bill Fraser, that somehow he came in and he wanted Bill to pat him or something or other. I forget exactly, but he had been drinking. That's the memory that I have anyway.
The other guy of which I've heard was Father Ferris that we had for general science, remember, first year? ninth
I
grade.
heard that from Sokol and his class about Ferris.
Was Ferris the chemistry teacher?
No, that was Father Wood.
Oh, Father
Father Ferris taught us general science when we were in the ninth grade, and he was gone the next year.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Um,
Let me,
but
so I have a, do you remember in freshman, okay, this is, it's one of those memories that I'm not sure. Do you remember who was the rector during our freshman year?
Father Roden.
Rodden.
The road.
Roden, Victor Roden, yeah.
They expelled a couple of Hispanic kids, and maybe they weren't. And he gave it. There was a speech that he gave about we're not going to have kids like this in the class. And maybe my memory is so distorted, and I did not know anything about homosexuality or anything like that. And I didn't, years later, I started to piece it together and wondered if some kids in our freshman year were kicked out because a priest or two thought that maybe they were gay. Is there any memory you guys have of anything like that happening?
That was the special friendship talk, was it not?
Something
Don't
like that.
have special friendships.
Yes, something like that.
And I would not be surprised at all, Tim, if those people may have raised something about Ferris. I wouldn't put it beyond Rodden at all to have kicked them out to avoid any problem with Ferris.
But weren't they? But weren't the kids that were kicked out Mexican?
I don't
don't recall
recall that
that.
about that.
Of course, remember, we
Kid
were
named Valens-
a
Manuel
freshman
Valenzuela?
class of over 100.
Yeah, and
108.
then three
So-
different groups too.
in three
Yeah.
different groups. And, I think of an attitude of the faculty administration was, hey, these guys are expendable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of the law of supply and demand. There were a lot of
Yeah.
seminarians in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gary, if you had it all to do over again, would you?
Oh, yeah. I've loved the priesthood. It's been a wonderful life.
On a happy note, I'd like to stick with that for a minute because Gary, you, according to Sokol, you had two really great gifts as a priest. He was of the opinion you were a spectacular preacher and a great confessor. And I'm wondering, did you have mentors? I don't think they taught those skills in the seminary, but in your experience, how did those qualities come to be?
I think the thing that probably struck me the most about Jack O'Hare was that he was very human. And people had a sense that they could that he understood their lives because he was one of them. I don't know how else to say it, but I've always, and I learned over the years that the more you try to share part of your own life with the people you're preaching to, that seemed to be the most effective thing. I mean, that's how I believed anyway. I always remember, was it Charlie Miller who told us about, did he say, never say we, always say you need to do this. I forget exactly what it was, but I always took the opposite. I mean,
Al revés, yeah.
I always felt that in preaching to people, I'm just preaching to myself first. I mean, I'm not any different from anybody else. I just happen to have a different way of life. I mean, but I'm trying to struggle with my own faith, with my own personal issues, uh, with my own spirituality. I mean, I'm struggling too, but I happen to be the one who has to say something.
Mhm.
And you know, and the best when I got into clergy education, one of the things that we did something on preaching, and there was a workshop by a priest named Fred Balmer. He was a precious blood priest, and it was actually the last workshop that he gave before he left the priesthood and got married. But was it held? It was held in Malibu at Sarah. It's what's the retreat place? Is it Sarah in
All right,
Malibu?
yeah,
Yeah. And I took a team of 5 priests and myself in the diocese, and he gave a great workshop on preaching. I mean, we had to preach and get filmed and all that kind of stuff. But he made a distinction between transactional communication and transmissional communication. And transmissional communication was, I have a body of knowledge that I'm going to give to you. Transactional communication is, I'm telling you how I am reacting to, say, this scripture, in the hopes that it will enact whatever it is to be in you. And I always found that to be probably that was the best. That was the best. I think Charlie Miller gave us good grounding in homiletics. But this Fred Balmer really had that one piece of it that really struck me. So whatever preaching I've done has always been more. I mean, I do exegesis and all that sort of stuff, but at the end, every Sunday, the only thing I ever said was, how can I help? How can I make this scripture mean something for these people, for this group?
And you want to make a step toward the other aspect of being a good confessor?
That I don't know. I don't know that I'm a good confessor. I just know that I'm like every other priest. When someone comes in for the confessional, you're just there to help them. I don't know, experience God's mercy. I mean, that's it.
And some aspect of spiritual direction went with the reconciliation?
I'm sorry.
Some aspects of spiritual direction that you could offer?
Well, yeah. I don't know if it was direction. I mean, I had a spiritual director who's now dying, Warren Hollering. I've had him for almost 40 years, and he's the most non-judgmental person. I mean, he's always trying to say, this is how God is working in your life now, and all that sort of stuff. So he never tries to tell you what to do. You know, he might say once in a while, I think you need to move in this direction, but that's only what I could do. In the confessional with people, I mean, there are times when you do kind of
Counsel?
suggest different ways of acting. Yeah, but that's up to them. I don't know how to say that. I don't think of myself as a spiritual director. I mean, I think a person needs to be trained to do that.
Mhm.
Now, I know George Crook has had a wonderful Jesuit spiritual director. I have had Gino Toole for many years as a spiritual director. Tim, how about you?
I envy you guys for that. And I guess my spiritual directors have been my friends in my Curcio group, but yeah, and that's which is a group of about 5 or 6 guys. But I envy. In fact, Welbers said that what got him through those times during his priesthood where he began to have doubts and questions was he had a great spiritual director. And so when Ferrick was giving his conversation about his difficulties, he never had anybody he could talk with. Yeah, and I thought that was a sad thing.
It was sad. Yeah,
And I wish George, because you guys, I wonder if Ferrick had not gone to Pomona to that god awful Monsignor, but it had a pastor like Lombardi had, if things may have turned out different for Ferrick. What do you think?
You know, there was a guy in our parish, in our diocese named Larry Carolyn, and Larry was ordained just before me. And Larry was sent to the guy who was the pastor here named Clyde Tillman, who was a gruff old kind of guy. And I went to Jack O'Hare. Later on in life, I came to Petaluma with Clyde Tillman after my years with Jack O'Hare. Larry Carolyn ended up having left the priesthood, but he was taught at St. John's School where Jack O'Hare was pastor. And Larry often said to me, I've often wondered if our roles had been reversed, if you'd gone to Clyde Tillman instead of Jack O'Hare, and I went to Jack O'Hare instead of Clyde Tillman, where we would be today. You know,
What I asked Tom, what I asked was if Ferrick had been able to have a pastor the way Lombardi did at the outset, rather than that, what was the guy's name he had in Pomona?
Monsignor English.
Yeah, I
yeah.
wonder if maybe he had been able to get through those early years of wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be like. And Gary was saying in your absence that he's had really good spiritual directors, like you told us the other day, that it got you through those hard times.
Well, yeah, you know, we could always analyze those if onlys for all of our lives. And, you know, I had some absolutely, totally miserable pastors for, I would say, my first, certainly the first one, maybe second and third. The fourth was really good. That was Jerry Schmidt. But, you know, I two things. I always had some kind of an interest outside of the parish that I was able to bring back into the parish. And that was mostly the liturgy stuff that I had. And the second thing is right from that first parish, I did value spiritual direction.
Mhm.
And I know, I think most of our class who were ordained, we never had any good experience of spiritual direction in the seminary, or rarely did. I don't know. I never did. I know.
Well, you just didn't go to Charlie Barr.
I didn't go to Charlie Barr.
yeah.
No, I did go, and I think he was decent.
I mean, he was crazier than hell, but he
Yeah.
was a holy man, I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to shock you because I had one semester of great spiritual direction from B.J. McCoy.
Oh, please, John. Do you think we're going to believe that?
Well,
You could fool some of the people some of the time, Todd.
somehow, when we came back from the summer before third theology, and I had worked in the chancery office and my doubts had begun, somehow I shared that with McCoy. And he brought me in every week during that whole semester to talk about discernment of my vocation. And I'll always be grateful for him.
I liked BJ. In all seriousness, I did enjoy BJ. I liked him.
Yeah.
I did too. I could never take him seriously.
Yeah.
Well, there's that.
But I could tell he cared. I mean,
Yeah.
he listened, he shared. That was a big grace for me.
Oh, good. Gary, I remember you being close to Angrisani and Jabro. And I remember a conversation you and I had, and you were talking about a part of the appeal of that. And, you know, you imputed to them this kind of idealized Catholic school boyhood at Transfiguration, and the stories they had, et cetera, et cetera. Did you stay at all in touch with them after you were ordained?
You know, I with Bob Jayro every so often, and then especially after he left the priesthood, I did go to see him once or twice because he had developed prostate cancer, and at the same time, I had open heart surgery in 2012.
Oh, wow.
I had a double bypass. Yeah, I never had anything wrong, but as it turned out, my arteries were kind of, as a surgeon said, they were bendy, and I guess there was blockages at the bends that all seems to have been taken care of. But at that same time, Bob, I was in contact with Bob, and that's when he told me about having this prostate cancer. I went to see him once or twice. And once in a while we talk on the phone. I had lost contact with Jerry Angrasani until just recently. John, you sent something out somewhere, and Jerry contacted me. He's living over in Colusa or something like that, and
Yes.
Sacramento Valley. And I had said maybe when this COVID thing gets done, we could get together. Well, we haven't put that together. But I've not seen Jerry for many years. But he's apparently pretty active in the parish that he's in.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, and it's maybe 6 or 8 months ago, he is a daily communicant.
Yeah.
But he said he has no interest in class reunions or any of that.
Yeah.
He's,
Was he ordained?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I was, yeah.
Okay, okay. What do you, Gary, do you have any connection with anyone else in the class?
Paul Dotson.
You do?
I do
Okay.
see Paul. Oh, yeah, when I come down to LA, in fact, I'm coming down next week, but I won't be, I'll just be in Valencia very briefly. But when I'm down long enough, I always give Paul a call. We get together for lunch. And last summer I was down in the desert last March, and he has a place he bought a place in Palm Desert. Yeah. So and the thing is with Paul, you know, if I don't talk to Paul for 8 months and I call him up, it's just like yesterday.
What about,
Just like, well, anyway, and then he just starts talking.
does anyone see Norm?
been a while.
I would think, Tom, you and John, you would see Norm.
Yeah, he's probably the one of our class that I've been in probably the closest touch with. In fact, he came to Turkey with me on the very last pilgrimage that I led. But he, you know, he seems to be very, very actively retired, and but I haven't talked to him since COVID.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
Yeah, I have. I talked to him, within the last month, just on the phone. I thought I was returning a call from him, but apparently I called him out of the blue. That was an awkward conversation until I got my footing in it, you know, because
It's called a butt call, George.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the wrong name.
Yep. And, I'm gonna ignore
Speaking
that.
of which,
Yeah, no, I'm gonna ignore that. But Norman, yeah, he's been a very active priest, and he's got his groupies. You know, he really has a following. I've never been part of it, but you know, those who like Norman's approach like Norman's approach.
it's interesting. He has count them, 3 Facebook pages,
Oh my.
and he is active on all 3 of them,
Oh,
which that boggles my mind.
I just
Well, I have
Get off.
0.
Yeah, you're lucky.
Did you get a sense if Norm still is in touch with Barney Gatlin?
Maybe a little.
I think he is.
Occasionally, I thought. I mean, you know about Barney, right, Gary, the great recluse and mystery man of the class.
He's up in Fillmore somewhere, is he?
Yeah, you know, I mean, what the hell? But I mean, he, little by little, those with whom he kept up contact, he's abandoned it, you know, sort of serially. I guess the last to go was Ted.
I think the last, and it broke Ted's heart. He's still very hurt by that.
And mad. And mad, John, right?
Yeah,
Oh, Ted is mad at the Barney?
Yeah,
Yes.
he's just hurt. He's, you know,
You know,
it-
didn't Ted come out with some sort of a book that he?
yeah,
oh, it's a brilliant book. If you
And,
don't
no,
have it,
it's
you
not.
should have it.
And
not brilliant. It's not brilliant at all.
Dave,
It's kind of a fun book.
Dave Shaw got a hold of it, so he gave it to me, and but he did idolize Barney Gatlin.
Yes,
It was an homage to Gatlin. I
Yeah,
thought,
it was.
you know. Gee. Ah,
Did you say that you had the book, Gary, or not?
Dave Shaw gave it to me. No, I gave it back to Dave.
Oh, okay, because
Oh,
I do,
right.
I never bought it, but I
you can get it online.
reproduced it from the website where the book was being sold. So if
Yeah.
you like, I could send you a PDF copy.
It ain't worth it.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Good for you, Gary.
I gotta
Yeah,
go.
I mean, there are good parts of it, but I mean, Teddy is just so happy every time he can expose a bad priest in that book, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
He takes such gaudium in it. And that says more about Teddy than the guys he exposes, I think.
Isn't he a judge?
He's a, yeah, he
Yes.
is. And
For
he's
like
a very good judge.
9 or 10 years now.
And
You
George,
know,
where are you?
huh?
Are you a lawyer?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sort of pretty much retired, but yeah. Last several years of my practice, I represented learning disabled kids against school systems.
wow.
Mm.
Talk about a niche practice, you know. So if you had a nephew with autism or something down in LA, chances are he or she would have found his or way he or
Wow.
to our firm, you know. It's something like 11-12% of the population as a whole is disabled, at least with learning disabilities. It's invisible, you know.
Mhm.
But I was so ignorant when I joined this firm that this is their practice. I thought these, you know, indentations in street corners were for skateboarders. I mean, that's how ignorant I was of the world of the disabled, and it's huge. Wow.
And Tim, how did you get to North Carolina? I don't know anything what happened to you.
Well, so after, in just a couple of minutes, after I left you guys, I graduated and earned my doctorate in political science at UC and taught at the University of Georgia. So that means I went to the South, and I stayed at Georgia for 12 years and then left at the academy, so to speak, and went into the investment business and moved to South Florida, moved to Palm Beach. And I did that for 35 years. And then I retired at the age of 62 in 2004 and retired up to North Carolina. We had been coming up here summers to Western North Carolina, to the Asheville area generally is where we live. And so we moved out of South Florida and came up here, and it was we'd lived for 26 years, 27 years in Florida, and loved it a lot, and dear friendships, but Florida was getting crazy. It was really politically, socially, culturally more and more difficult for us. Like, for example, and we were part of a country club set, I'll be very honest with you. And the country club was a precinct, and we were literally the only registered Democrats in the whole precinct. And so there was no human being that we could talk with about politics. I mean, and that's kind of a hard thing. And we thought, well, we'll move up to Western North Carolina, and there's obviously got to be some Democrats. Well, there were a few there, and they're on my street. Fortunately, I think the majority of the street I live on are Democrats, but the area is just, I mean, there are still people who are, now people have got Trump 24 flags flying in the neighborhood, you know, so and so the politics part is really, really hard. It's really hard. And then and it's kind of a sidebar. I think half the population is opposed to vaccines. They're opposed to masks, and so we've literally not been to mass in 3 months because the pastor refuses to enforce masking to come to church. And given that we know that half the people in the church will not get vaccinated, and we're 79, I mean, shit, you know, we're kind of vulnerable. And so
if I hear you correctly, though, the Curcio has really been a big blessing for you, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's yeah. I mean, yeah. And we get together, and I require my friends to wear a mask. They don't want to wear a mask. They think it's hokey and it's bullshit. But I said, look, guys, I'm 17 years older than anyone else in my Curcio group. They're all in their young 60s. But and so, but we love it. We love the mountains. We love, you know, we love the rain. We love the four seasons. And so we'll die here. I mean, we're going to die here.
Yeah, I'll have to check with these friends of mine who live in Pinehurst. They have a home in the mountains about 4 hours away from Pinehurst, and so it might be somewhere near your area.
Well, we live in a place called Flat Rock. Okay, so ask them. Yeah, and Gary, it would be neat if you could send to Tom your contact information. Would you mind doing that? Like phone number?
Yeah, I have got your phone number and obviously your email address. So if I could have your address, street address, mailing address,
Yeah.
then I'll get it out to everybody.
Okay, I've got to kind of end this, but I'm supposed to do the prayer. So can I?
Yeah, and it's time for me to have to eat. I haven't eaten anything yet.
Yeah, it is that time. So why don't you go
Okay, so
pray and then we'll say goodbye.
Do you do
Well,
this
Gary, thank you so much.
every week or what?
We're doing it every week.
I won't be around. I'm going down to Southern California on Sunday, and I'm driving back on Friday, so I won't be around. But it's nice at 10 o'clock generally. You keep me informed because this is wonderful. It's wonderful to see everybody. It's been so long.
it's a
Yeah.
blessing to see you, Gary.
We'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
When you
You're
see
on the
Paul-
list.
When you see Paul Dodson, tell him it's his turn to make the phone call to George.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I'm not standing on ceremony. I keep meaning to call him. Every time I call Paul, that's the afternoon. I mean, it's like a 4-hour
Oh, I know.
conversation.
I know.
And it's just such great fun, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay, so let me get, all right, so,
Let us pray, Tim.
okay, so the reason, this is one of my favorite guys, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I don't know if you know the Bonhoeffer story, but anyway, we've spent a lot of time in Germany. And so when he was in concentration camp, he composed this prayer, so I'm going to read it to you. And it's a morning prayer, but it's worth. Oh God, early in the morning, I cry to you. Help me to pray and to concentrate my thoughts on you. I cannot do this alone. In me there is darkness, but with you there is light. I'm lonely, but you do not leave me. I'm feeble in heart, but with you there is help. I'm restless, but with you there is peace. In me there is bitterness, but with you there is patience. And this is the line. I do not understand your ways, but you know the way for me. Restore me to liberty and enable me to so live now that I may answer before you and before men. Lord, whatever this day may bring, your name be praised. And then he was executed.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Tim.
God bless you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What a joy.
Equally, Tim.
Bye, guys.
Oh, God
you.
bless
Gary,
you.
thank you again.
Love you
Thank
all.
you.
Love you, Tim.
Delightful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Thank you all. Thank you.
So shall I end this for all?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
I'm,
Gary is hungry and we are 11 minutes over what we usually are. So
It's been a delight.
it's
thank
been a
you very
delight.
much for inviting
God
me.
bless you all. And
Thank you. Thank you.
until next week.
Thank you.
Amen.
I'll
Bye-bye.
see you in 2 weeks. Ciao.